Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for introducing me to Selma Stern's work, because I didn't know about her or this novel before the invitation, but it really touches on a topic which I've studied in some detail. And the slides are entitled "The Persecution of Jews During the Black Death," and it's actually based on joint work with Noel Johnson, Teresa Finley, and Rennie Jibwab, much of which is summarized in the book that Michael just kindly mentioned. So I can go into a lot more detail on any of these topics in the Q&A if people are so interested. But I think I'll just set out some of the background, which is reflected very much in the novel. The novel gives you what you need to know, but the background to the situation of the Jews in the Middle Ages. So this is just an illustration of the type of charter Jewish communities might receive to settle within a town or city or an area in the Holy Roman Empire during the 14th century. And so here's the Emperor Henry VII granting Jews the right to settle, and I think it's Koblenz. I might be wrong there, but I think so. And you can see from the illustration, it's kind of like certain key elements. Firstly, the Jews are below the nobility and the emperor. So that's reflecting their status, that they're supposed to be in a lower station. Their right to settle in any European or any Christian polity is exemplifies what I mean and Noel Johnson call conditional toleration. So the Jews are allowed to live. They're supposed to be free from persecution, and they're supposed to be free from pressure to convert, from forced conversion. But their rights are very limited. They're prohibited from a lot of activities, from guild membership, from bearing arms, and their settlement right, their right to settle is conditional on providing certain services to the rulers. And one of the most important of these services, which comes up a lot in the book, is being moneylenders. And as moneylenders to the king, they're almost indirect tax collectors. And you can see here the Jews are wearing distinguishing headgear. And also their charter looks like it's, I mean, can't tell exactly, but it looks like it's in Hebrew writing. And the Christians look different to the Jews, and they're wearing different clothes, and their different statuses are distinguished. So again, happy to explain this in more detail, but Jewish communities in Europe are small. So we're talking about a few dozen families most of the time. They were spread out across Europe. So many small towns and cities would have Jewish communities, but these Jewish communities would be very small. They're don't think about the large kind of communities you would observe in Eastern Europe in the 17th, 18th, 19th, early 20th centuries. Medieval Jewish communities would be very small. They would not be confined to ghettos, but often living maybe on a single Jewish street. But they were not necessarily confined to any one part of a town. But they were not allowed to do many tasks. Europe at this time is a world of status, where your religious identity, your social identity, if you're a serf, if you're a member of a merchant class, would determine what types of occupations you could do. And so as a result of this, and also as a result of the fact that the Jews tended to be much more literate, much better educated than the Christian population, they were specialized in a few areas of economic activity: long distance trade, medicine, which you see in the novel, retailing, the wine trade, but above all else, money lending. And the main reason for the specialization in money lending is the Christian prohibition on interest, which is not enforced in the absolute, but is enforced to some degree and leads to Jews being very important as moneylenders, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire at this period. In Italy, Italian Lombard kind of banking houses like the Bardi, the Abruzzi, later the Medici were emerging. So there's already banking done by Christians. But in Germany, this was more backwards financially, and the Jews were playing a crucial role in money lending, particularly in interest, and particularly in lending money to rulers, which is always a very risky occupation. So now I'm going to be drawing from kind of published research I have. The map you're seeing here is from research I've done with Noel Johnson, also Warren Anderson, actually. And this is a map of Jewish communities and pogroms or persecutions throughout the medieval and early modern period. So really 1100 all the way up to 1800. And the larger the circle you see here, the more persecutions that town received. And so if we're thinking about the Holy Roman Empire, it's kind of here. And there are a lot of pogroms, basically, which is, unsurprising. Why were Jews victims of periodic persecution? So in my own research, I attempt to disentangle some of potential causes for this. In particular, we're interested in explaining the variation and timing of the pogroms. So anti-Semitism is a background condition, obviously, but anti-Semitism is kind of, it might have been rising a little bit over time, but it's in some sense a constant. So if you want to explain why were the Jews persecuted at particular points in time, you can't resort just to anti-Semitism. You've got to explain other factors, and one of the key ones is this role of scapegoating. So the idea that Jews would be scapegoated during bad times. So a bad time could be an economic downturn, or it could be an episode of disease. And so in one paper, we use climate data, which I'm just showing you very quickly here, because I should not take too much time. And we find that when it's colder, so periods of colder weather, we show that food prices go up, so the agricultural economy contracts, and we find the probability of Jewish communities being persecuted goes up pretty significantly. This effect is really an effect of the Middle Ages, doesn't take place after 1600. In the novels, there's a brief reference to the Armada massacres. So these were massacres in the Rhineland, which preceded the Black Death. And interestingly enough, the Armada massacres coincided with a period of deteriorating temperatures in the Rhineland, which supports our story about scapegoating. But when it comes, the biggest and the worst by far episode of scapegoating in pre-industrial, pre-modern Europe of a Black Death pogrom. So Black Death pogroms stand out in terms of their intensity, their scale, and their scope. I mean, they're probably the worst pogroms before the 20th century. And so this is from our data collected in our papers, where we number of communities which suffer a persecution, which is even expulsion or pogrom. And the Black Death period stands out above all these other episodes you see. And the Black Death pogroms were mostly just in the year 1349. That's what we're showing here. They're really in 3 years, all the pogroms take place, but most of them in 1349. And the question is, why were the Jews blamed for the Black Death? Why did the Black Death lead to such an intense series of massacres? But why was there also, the research question I'm interested in is, why do some towns, some cities persecute Jewish communities and others don't? So I think I'm going to skip over my slides here, but I can talk about the Black Death. It's spreading through Europe fairly rapidly, but not super rapidly, in the sense that it first hit Southern Europe in 1347, but it only really hits Germany properly by 1349. So it's taking about 18 months to move from Southern Italy to Germany, and it's when it hits Germany where you get by far the worst kind of Black Death pogroms. So I'll skip over my description of the Black Death, but and get to the meat of the matter. So the Jews are blamed for causing the Black Death. And this is from The Spirit Returneth, from Somerset's novel. So this idea of this conspiracy theory, this big lie that the Jews have poisoned the wells. And so this lie is publicly refuted by the Pope twice, but it spreads in the way described by the novel, because Jews are interrogated under torture, and under torture you'll say anything, so they implicate other Jewish communities, and so the Jews are blamed, and this lie spreads particularly through the Rhineland, and sometimes Jews are killed in anticipation of a plague arriving. Once the plague does arrive, though, it kills everybody, Jews and Christians alike. So when the plague gets to your town and it's really bad, then there's some evidence that the likelihood of the Jewish community being totally wiped out goes down. And I'm going to skip over this briefly, but I have an econometric study where we actually find that the worse the Black Death was in a town, the less likely the Jews were actually to be victimized. But the most intense, the most likely, you're most likely to be persecuted if the Black Death killed around 20% of the population. But if it killed everybody, then actually Jews were less likely to be persecuted across Europe. We also find that Jews were most likely to be persecuted if the plague arrived during Easter, because Easter is a period when anti-Semitic sentiment is often heightened because of the association blaming Jews for the death of Christ. So that's illustrated this is a later painting, obviously, by Caravaggio, but illustrates that idea because Judas is often portrayed with Jewish features and Christ looking more Gentile. The final thing I want to get into, because I think it's the most relevant for Selma Stern's novel, is what explains variation specifically within the Holy Roman Empire, within the German-speaking territories. And so I published a paper on this a few years ago, and it's also in the book I mentioned. But it's very, very much in the novel, which is the relationship between the political economy of the Holy Roman Empire and the persecution of Jews. So specifically, the emperor is weak in the Holy Roman Empire, and political authority by the mid-14th century had devolved to local rulers, electors, counts, lords, cities, archbishops, bishops, and they were competing over the right to tax the Jews, essentially. And they were also weak as well. And so even if the local ruler wants to protect the Jews, they will not often be able to. And you see that in the novel where the local ruler advises the Jewish community to leave because he knows he cannot protect them. And so in our study, so when you see this in the novel, these are some quotes from Selma Stern's novel, that the emperor kind of charges all these super high taxes, but he's not powerful enough. He can't really protect the Jews. And so that's partly why the Holy Roman Empire sees the most intense persecutions. If there was a strong ruler, that ruler might have internalized the benefits to keeping the Jews around and might have been able to protect them from the anger of the mob, but you don't see that in the Holy Roman Empire, or at least you don't see that in many cities and territories of the Holy Roman Empire. And so in the study with Teresa Finley, we use the Germania Judaica, which is this amazing historical source for Jewish history, and it tells us about the fate of 340 towns of Jewish communities in the Holy Roman Empire. That's what they look like. That's their distribution, and we can code whether or not these communities are ruled by the emperor directly, electors, bishops, archbishops, town councils. And what we find, I'm going to skip ahead. What we find is that the pogroms are much more intense in cities which are not ruled directly by the emperor, but ruled by these local rulers who maybe cannot protect the Jewish communities. And so what do we mean by intense? Well, this is how we code it. An intense pogrom is where the entire Jewish community is destroyed, or there are many deaths. Whereas a less intense pogrom might be just an expulsion, or in some cases, the Jewish communities were spared. Not all Jewish communities suffered during the Black Death, but in the worst case scenario, you get pretty horrific outcomes. So this is a contemporary wood print of the massacre of the Jews of Strasbourg, where they're burned alive in 1349, which is a particularly horrific pogrom. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that, my formal presentation, because I'm sure people have we want to talk about the novel and have questions as well. So I'm gonna end here. I'll just show you my final slide, but if you're interested in more, my book with Noel is only $22 on Amazon, so it's very affordable.